I'm going to talk about the research design and the program design, and in the program design I want to pay particular attention to what were the effective elements of the program. Then I'm going to talk about both the short-term and the long-term effects, and I want to emphasize that there's really two meanings of the word explain, and I'd like to clarify that because people don't always distinguish between those two terms. There's explanation of long-term effects or whatever in the program itself. What were the components of the program that led to long-term effects? And then there's a second type of explanation, which is how do the short-term effects explain the long-term effects or account for the long-term effects? What were the mediators of long-term effects? It's a different question, and it's important in its own right. And then finally, I want to talk about the specific question of this conference, which I have framed as, is fade out a problem? And I don't think fade out or drop off are either one of them the right word. And finally, I want to draw some conclusions. The real key to the fact that we continue to pay attention to this study is the fact that randomizing procedures were used to assign children to a program or no program. It wasn't perfect random assignment, and you can focus in on the kinds of things that were differed from pure random assignment, but nonetheless in small samples you make some allowances for trying to equalize the groups and so forth. And in fact the randomizing procedures were used, and they've been tested against more sophisticated techniques for dealing with the problems and get the same essential results. We collected a lot of data. Educational data was collected annually from ages 3 to 11, and educational, economic, crime, family, and health data at 15, 19, 27, and 40. Only 5% of the data were missing. So we've covered a whole bunch of problems that are associated with longitudinal studies right there. We have an age 50 data collection that's, I think it might be done. We're working with a consortium of people, including Jim Heckman and NORC and RAND Corporation, to collect data at age 50. They've got a lot of questions that we might have asked back when kids were 5, but in any case, we're asking when they're 50. Okay, this is the program. The program was serving African American children living in poverty. There are questions of generalization in both those terms, whether it applies across races. I think you can make a pretty good argument that it does. Whether it serves specifically children in poverty, the question there becomes, well, exactly what constitutes poverty? In Michigan, our definition of poverty extends up to about the median income. Well, that's not bad. But in any case, these children were living in poverty. One of the fundamental features of the quality of the program is there were 4 certified teachers for 25 children. There's two ideas packed into that. One is that they were certified teachers. They were typical public school teachers, and they were paid at typical public school teacher rates, actually 10% higher. And that's what it generalizes to. You'll notice there too, 4 to 25 is a pretty good ratio. I've seen one classroom in Ireland that had 4 teachers. I've never seen any others. But in any case, that's what this one had. And there was no differentiation between teachers and teacher aides, which we've decided is necessary in our systems. It was set up as half 3-year-olds and half 4-year-olds. Of course, when the public schools got into it, they decided that programs were they could only afford 1 year, but we had 2, and that's what we did. We had class 5 mornings a week, 8 months a year. It was a little bit of a short year because it took a while to get started, and it was a special program. And finally, and in deference to Heather Weiss, I want to be very clear about this, that there were weekly home visits. There is no Perry preschool program without weekly home visits. It's the only one we did, and it's still the case that that's what we did. A very important component of quality, in addition to the teachers and the home visits and the fact that we had an evaluation going on all the time, is the curriculum. And I wanted to say a while ago when we were talking about that there's 2 ways to organize components of quality, and it has to do with point of contact. One point of contact is between teachers and children. Another point of contact is between teachers and parents, but also another point of contact is between teachers and administrators and policymakers. And if you're looking at ease of influence, probably the point of contact between teachers and administrators is the point where you make the biggest, you've got the most control. But if you're looking at what makes for long-term effects, it's the point of contact between teachers and children, and therefore it is curriculum. One other point about curriculum is that these were curriculum through the eyes of psychologists for the most part, not curriculum through the eyes of educators. And I have a feeling that curriculum is designed differently by psychologists and educators, even educational psychologists, which kind of mixes the two together. A curriculum in the public school is typically done in terms of subject matters. These were not defined that way, and I think this is fairly generally true in early childhood education, not just the HighScope program. But what we did was to have teachers and children sharing control by balanced conversation. That's probably the biggest challenge to the public schools, the idea of balanced conversation with give and take, with listening as well as talking. There has to be a kind of a mix there. Second point is the children would plan, do, and review their own learning activities. That's something else that's fairly unique. Children are used to following orders in most situations. They were not always following orders in this classroom. They were planning, doing, and reviewing their own activities. The classroom setting and the daily routine was set up to support child-initiated activities as well as teacher-directed activities, so that there was a combination of both kinds of activities. But you can't just do it. You can't just have children initiate activities by saying, initiate an activity. You have to give them some supports for that, and that's what the classroom was set up for. Last point is we were focusing on all aspects of child development. As we've talked about generally through this conference, not just cognitive aspects, which would be the kind of a curriculum perhaps that educators would invent, which they invent all the time, in fact. But there was a concern with social emotional development. There were concerns with physical development, and there was a broad definition on cognitive development. So it wasn't just literacy and mathematics, which is what cognitive development means sometimes these days. It was a much broader focus on all aspects of child development. So this is a way to organize different approaches to curriculum, and I want to just quickly give you this idea. You'll notice that HighScope is in the upper quadrant there on the right. There are three alternatives to that as well. There's direct teaching, where the adult is active and the child is passive. The child is essentially receiving information from the adult. There's the opposite of that, which is sort of free play in the traditional nursery school sense, where the adult is passive and the child is active, and the teacher is supposed to essentially observe closely and stay out of the way. And we didn't do that either. And then there's the situation where everybody's passive, and that's babysitting in the usual form of that, where you sort of sit back and make sure nobody kills each other, and the children are not particularly oriented towards learning from any particular source. So the HighScope approach was distinguished from all of those in the sense that it was focusing on the teachers being active by very carefully structuring the day and structuring the environment to support children who also were active in their own right by virtue of making their own plans and carrying out those plans, and generally being up and about and engaging in activities. There's one really good button on this, and the others don't work. This is a particular, I'm afraid the chart that we've had of IQs going up and down and so forth has become iconic, and I wish it hadn't. This is a different way of presenting the data. This is both intellectual performance and school achievement. And the red is school achievement, you'll notice, and the blue line is intellectual performance. And that's time at the bottom, and then the scores and effect sizes on the left. So you'll see that you have the fade out, drop off, the cessation of an IQ effect that goes right on down. First grade, or second preschool, kindergarten, it drops down, and then first grade is hanging in there, and then it goes on down. At second, third, fourth, fifth grades, it becomes essentially non-significant. That's about the same time that the effects that we had on achievement tests increased. They even went up a little bit, which is a kind of gratuitous thing. But you'll notice that second, third, and fourth grade, the achievement effects are stronger than the IQ effect. And then it dropped off at fifth grade, I think probably for test artifacts. And then the largest effect we ever got on achievement tests was not at first, second, third, fourth, or fifth grade. It was at eighth grade. It got stronger than ever. And there's a number of remarkable things about that, but it makes you think, well, okay, it's not IQ that's driving, at least not IQ gains that are driving that. It must be something else. So this is something that's seldom presented except in our monographs, but I thought it was particularly appropriate to this conference. It's a causal model of the HighScope Perry Preschool Study. I don't know if you can see all that, but I want to make one point. First of all, this is the models that Arthur was presenting earlier from the Consortium for Longitudinal Studies were sort of a part of this. This goes all the way out to age 40. There's preschool experience, pre-program IQ at the beginning. And then the next box there is the mediator of long-term effects. I'm convinced of it. It's post-program IQ. Then it splits out into commitment to schooling and achievement at age 14. And that goes on to focus on educational attainment at age 40, and then beyond that, earnings at 40 and arrests by age 40. But I want to concentrate on one particular aspect of that, and that is the post-program IQ. It's the gateway variable. It's the mediator that leads from the preschool experience to all the long-term effects. Now, I'm no really big fan of IQ, but there it is right there, and it's pretty powerful. So also, I want to talk about sustaining early childhood gains in light of this, because there's no gain that's sustained there, but there are gains that are sustained, if you see what I mean. There's no persistence to the IQ effect, which is where the whole idea of fade out came from, but it's every bit as powerful as if it was sustained in some broader sense. It's important because it's enough to get to the next level. And I would suggest to you that it's not the sustaining of early childhood gains that's the important thing. It's the ability to affect the next phase. It's the ability to be a mediator. That's much more important than whether it happens to be the same kind of test that's got the same name on it that you're measuring the effect on later on. I'll just flip through these long-term findings. I think you're familiar with them. The placement and graduation of females is an interesting story. We've not focused on it too much because we've not been all that focused on males versus females. But the academic placement effects, both in that case, you see the differences there between impairment or retention for girls is very large, and the high school graduation rate is very large. In fact, they're the largest effects in the whole study. And it was only for girls, but you can see that they persisted. Adult median earnings was higher at age 27, higher at age 40. And I think we can infer that it probably was higher between 27 and 40, and in fact, the career earnings were higher. So a very different trajectory there. This is the most important single finding, maybe. 5 or more lifetime arrests is one way to present it, 7% versus 29% at age 27, then 36% versus 55 at age 40. We really made a difference in a really hard-to-affect variable there, and that drives a number of other things. This is the reason we're here, folks. This is the economic analysis of the Perry Preschool Project, and it has led to interest by many policymakers in the field that they would not have been interested in otherwise. I could go on and on about that, but let me suffice it to explain this. The program, you'll notice at the bottom the cost of the program, which was a pretty high cost if you're only looking at that. If you're looking at the returns, it's a pretty low cost. As you can see, it's almost not on the chart. You can see the 1 year of preschool was essentially paid back by school, and I noticed it's in Utah, they just did a social bond experiment out there, got the same kind of effect and paid off the preschool costs so they didn't have the special education later. The earnings are pretty substantially different, the taxes that the earners are paying. And then the largest single effect is to the crime and justice system. Crime and incarceration costs a lot of money, an awful lot of money, and nobody sits around debating how much it's going to cost like they do here. It's just really quite extraordinary. Our state legislature just got scared into spending a whole lot more money on prisons years ago, and we're spending way too much money on prisons when we could be doing this instead. Now, come on. I'll go on. I'll just go on. Let me concentrate on if you don't challenge the topic of the conference, then you don't have a good conference. And I want to really raise the question of whether fade out is a problem. And let me first of all interpret intelligence a little bit differently. Intelligence could be distinguished between, you could distinguish between a kind of an age-specific intelligence and a general intelligence that lasts over time. And intelligence then could be distinguished at early childhood into early childhood intelligence and general intelligence. So the program affected early childhood intelligence. It didn't do much of a job on school intelligence. That's also very consistent with the structure of an IQ test. So in both cases, it's just another way of saying that there's a fade out. But the preschool effect was still a central mediator for all the subsequent variables, and so therefore it has lasting value. It doesn't have to persist in order to have lasting value. It has to be a mediator. And also, I wanted to say generally, maybe all learning diminishes. There's no fade out of just an IQ. There's a fade out of everything. Think of your own learning. You remember what you use. You don't remember everything else. So let's think about that some more. IQ was left behind as the purpose of preschool, not because it wasn't right for preschool, but because ideas about IQ tests changed, as shown by Head Start, never considering it as an intended or measured outcome. I don't know what to do with that fact, but it is a fact. The mediator within this effect, and this is my interpretation, but I want to say what I think it is. I think it was the real mediator was learning how to be a better student academically and behaviorally. That's pretty consistent with what some other folks have said here. If you learn how to do it right, you're going to do it better, and then people are going to respond to that. So it's pretty obvious that there's corroboration for these findings from the Abecedarian and Chicago studies. There's also the multi-state study, the Tulsa, Oklahoma study, and the Boston study. The Boston study was mentioned the other day. But there have been some other studies that have not confirmed. The Head Start Impact Study is one. The Tennessee study is one. The Head Start study we just talked about, it assigned a national sample of children to Head Start, but 60% of the children were in some other early childhood program. So whatever the study had disappointing results, some early childhood programs are highly effective and others are not. That's a pretty reasonable conclusion. So the implication is to maintain program quality and evaluate the results all the time and stick with the results. You know what I'd like to do is have a program, slice $100 million off of some national program and put it into a completely outcomes-driven program. Don't give people so much per child. You say, spend what you need and have effectiveness. Here's a conclusion. High-quality early childhood education contributes to successful schooling, adult economic success, reduced crime, good health, and strong return on investment. It does all those things, but only high-quality programs do that. We're concerned with the effectiveness of programs. A whole other group of people are concerned with the efficiency of programs. What we need is somebody who's really concerned with efficient, effective programs. In the absence of anybody who's really showing the way on efficient, effective programs, then people just focus on efficiency, and other people just talk about effectiveness, but they don't really get to the point. So let's have a program that focuses on effective programs, and then maybe we can get somewhere. Thank you.